Welcome to Conservative Voices Talking Points. Rob, this next question is for you. Please describe what conservatism is not. There's this perception, some people call it a reality, of an erosion of conservatism in America. Can you kind of touch on that and giving us an example of what, again, conservatism is not?
Well, I believe that the erosion of conservatism is in front of us every day, and it's being eroded by big tech. Facebook and people that use Facebook, 36% of people, of adults in America, rely on Facebook to get their news. Yet Facebook banned President Trump for 2 years just this past January. So with that type of regulation or self-regulation by Facebook, it deprives 36% of the American people of news. You can move then to Twitter. Twitter pronounces Obama with the largest Twitter following of 129 some odd million people. Well, Trump had 89 million, they banned him. So it's pretty simple to see that the erosion of the conservative talking points, as we're talking about today, are being eroded because they don't have the town square microphone to speak to, the other side of our beliefs.
Eric, perception or reality, erosion of conservatism in America?
We've certainly, in the last several months, I've never seen us lose like we have been. Certainly to, like Rob said, to big tech, to big government, to being canceled. All of these, they're coming after us from all fronts. And anything that we say or anything that we're do, then we're all of a sudden labeled, whether it's racist or sexist or you name it, one of the is. It has been nonstop, and it's up to us to get it to stop and to let folks know that our voices need to be heard.
So I guess the question, this be addressed to you, Gentry, is when we talk about labeling, as Eric mentioned, Rob mentioned big tech, and I don't want to get too far in the discussion because that will be a talking point later in this panel discussion, but maybe give us what the founding fathers might have seen. Of course, they didn't see big tech, but when it came to free speech, did they limit it to the government?
No, they did not limit it to the government. In fact, as you of course know, they thought that free speech was such an important element in our democracy that they enshrined it as the First Amendment to the Constitution, the first in the Bill of Rights. And we've seen over time. It's funny, conservatives. You asked what conservatism is not a moment ago. I think very frequently conservatives get confused with being the party or the ideology of big business. And really nothing could be further from the truth. Conservatives much more often are the party of small business, right? More likely to be the party of Main Street than Wall Street, if you'll use or accept that example. In fact, if you look at where Wall Street's political contributions go, they mostly go to liberals, to the Democratic Party. I think one of the great traditions in American conservatism, written about by Friedrich Hayek, among others, in Road to Serfdom, is this idea that government does have a role to play in creating the conditions for effective competition. And that we saw greats like Teddy Roosevelt, for example, very much in the antitrust space, when it was time to break up private companies that had too much influence in the marketplace and were killing free speech, killing free enterprise, killing free competition. That is clearly happening today with big tech, and I think it's time for us to do in our time what previous generations of conservatives have done for the country in this regard.
So, kind of alluding to that, describe how conservatism aligns with the U.S. Constitution and our founding fathers. And feel free to touch on tech, feel free to touch on what you have touched on, just elaborate a little bit more on the antitrust. But to start, conservatism aligning with our U.S. Constitution and our founders' beliefs.
Yeah, I think that conservatism, traditionally understood, if you think about Edmund Burke, for example, who's commonly thought of as the intellectual father of modern conservatism, Burke believed that first and most important were individual rights and liberties, that governments derive their just power from the consent of the governed, and yet that long-standing institutions should not lightly be thrown aside, that one tyranny shouldn't be lightly thrown off for another. And then if we think about how those ideas were built right into the founding documents, early in the Declaration itself, before we even get to the Constitution, early in the Declaration you see these very ideas that governments derive their just power from the consent of the governed, that individual liberties and rights are tantamount, and even expressed in the Declaration of Independence that we don't do this lightly, and we shouldn't do this lightly. Talking about the American Revolution, changing governments, breaking the bonds that held us together previously. And so right in our founding documents are found these fundamental ideas that define conservatism.
Excellent. Eric, can you take what Gentry just said from a national scale? He talked about the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, and relate it to the current environment we're in, right? Taking away our founders' values and how possibly America, you could break it down to the state of Iowa, but as broad as America, has gotten away from those principles.
We've been silenced. That's exactly what's happened over the last 6 months is the silencing of conservatives and the silencing of conservative viewpoints. And to the effect that, I've lost, hundreds of followers on Twitter and not knowing exactly how that happened, but this is happening on a, to me on a small scale, but on a larger scale, you have all of these voices being shut down and shut off, and we need a place to be able to go and show and share those voices. I hope this show is one of those outlets to be able to do that. But we've got to be leaders, and we've got to make sure we are doing everything possible to get our voice back up there so it can be heard. Because even mainstream media has shut off the conservative voice, and it's important that we get that back.
All right. Rob, this is directed to you. Being the media expert in this panel, not that you guys aren't, but Rob spent the last 30 years being this expert in the media field. Help us figure out this media landscape and where conservatism can grow, can maybe blossom. And I get it. We're in the digital and social media makeup of the U.S. It's a digital world at this point. It seems like a social media world. But where do conservatives come in, Rob?
Well, I think conservatives can take advantage of this of what the internet and tech allows us by doing what we're doing today, is by creating our own voice, creating our own platform, creating the own extension of the web, and finding ways to let people know where they can go, a central hub of information. Maybe that's a challenge, it seems to be, with this past election. Where could you go to get the true scoop, if you would, on Trump and where he stands and where he doesn't stand, really the lies that are perpetrated by traditional media, digital media about conservatives. So I think this is a good start. I think that we need to see more of this from other players coming out and letting their views be known, and understand how to utilize tech to the advantage for the conservatives. I remember back in 2009, Gentry, after Obama had won his the second go-around, the Republicans had a call to action. They asked people to come out to DC and speak on how the Republicans or conservatives could take better advantage of technology. And so I went out there and I gave my 2 cents, but as to be able to focus and have a place where conservatives can go and get information. It seems to be a challenge or a confusion where there's a headquarters, so to speak, for those thoughts and ideas. And so this is a start to it, but it's a big internet, and there's a lot of money, and it's controlled by a lot of guys that have big names: Google, Apple, Amazon, Twitter, and all those folks aren't real friendly to our way of thinking.
Gentry, you mentioned antitrust issues a couple of topics ago. Hearing what Rob said, you want to discuss some antitrust issues from the past and how that might correlate to where we are right now with big tech.
Sure, there have been a number, right? I mean, the famous cases, of course, start with breaking up of Standard Oil or Old Bell and some of those. And I think that what's happened here in modern America today is that even though the Bill of Rights, and especially the First Amendment here, the right to free speech, is aimed at protecting us from the government. It is made, in fact, to keep the public square open, to keep the free exchange of ideas open. And what's happened, I think, with big tech is that they have become like a monopoly power, and like a monopoly power in a particularly dangerous way, because they take on some of those functions now in terms of being the public square, the modern public square, that all Americans must have equal and free access to if we're going to continue to have a robust democracy. And so the reason that I think some of those antitrust laws are something that we ought to examine is precisely because not only do they look and act like a monopoly, but that monopoly now threatens the very foundation of our democratic experiment here as Americans. Can we have free, fair, open access to the marketplace of ideas? Who is controlling that marketplace? Who is excluding people? And today, I think increasingly we have to conclude that it is agents of big tech.
Google controls 92.26% of search.
In the U.S.?
In the United States, 92%. Next is Microsoft in Bing at 2%. So, that pretty much is a definition of monopolistic control when you have 92% of the market and it represents $70 billion, which is cash, right? So we're in trouble if we believe that the benevolence of big tech exists, because it does not. It's constrictive, it's tyrannical. I can think of other bad names to call it, but I'll hold my lips tight. But yeah, it's a monopoly.
So what would be, back to you, Rob, what would be the answer of conservatives? And Eric, you can tune into this as well. I've heard ideas come around about creating our own networks, creating conservative social media channels. Feasible?
Yeah, it's absolutely feasible. You've got the networks, the traditional media, the ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, which controls pretty much, controls the traditional media airwaves. That would be a tough one to break into, a new network, but certainly having places, like I mentioned earlier, that branded conservative ideas, town square of ideas. Mike Lindell's doing a great job. We've all seen what he's done in trying to get the word out. But I think that's the biggest challenge to conservatives today, is to have a place where they can go and speak and talk and not be silenced. But it's the money involved is huge money. It's controlled by a certain 5-6 players, and until there's a break in that, it's going to be challenging. It's going to be challenging because of the legacy data that they own. And how they manipulate what you are served up when you do search, contextual searching. There's a lot of things that people aren't, why would they think of it? And they don't, but it's dangerous on the control that the big tech has today on the narrative, so to speak, of what's right, wrong, or indifferent.
So Eric, maybe advice, taking what Rob said, advice for Iowans. Let's bring this into Iowa, the state of Iowa. What do conservatives need to do to get a voice out?
We need to be active. We need to, I feel like we've been silenced, or we've been pushed into a corner where we've been made to feel uncomfortable to talk, or uncomfortable to say exactly what we stand for and what our conservative views and values are. I think that they've pushed us into a corner that has made us afraid to say that. And now what we need to do as Iowans, and certainly locally, we need to have a voice. We need to be able to respond to things appropriately, through the social medias that exist today. But I like the idea too, and I know there's a lot of rumor that President Trump is putting together his own voice and his own network that's going to allow him to get his silenced voice out again. I'm excited for that. In fact, I've had friends that have called me that want to invest in anything that would be, because that void is so there.
Yeah, it doesn't exist.
To conservatives, that we've got to be leaders, and we've got to do things just like this and be investors in what's next, so that our conservative voice is heard, loud.
And to add to that, if Trump were to come out with his own platform, you're going to see a vacuum he's going to suck in people because they were looking for what Trump has to say, looking for the ideas that Trump espouses, and looking for a location where they can go and get that type of information. I can only imagine that the Trump organization will do it first class, and it will be something that we're talking about right now, what we want, and I think he'll deliver on it. And it's to the detriment of big tech, but to the benefit of our country, to be able to see and hear and talk about things that are important to us and not to the things that are taking place today.